I have a treat for you. The last session of the day is by good friends of ours at Glenbrook. We have Cici and her team. I see Elizabeth as well. And I'm very grateful to them because I know it's very early in the morning wherever they are, and they've gladly called in to share with us a session on a payment system pricing tool that may be of interest to a number of us here and deployers. So take it away, Cici and Elizabeth.
Thanks, Simeon. I'm going to start us off. I'm Elizabeth McQuarrie with Glenbrook. Our team is here. We have Cici Northup, who many of you know, and a new person, Bethany May, which you may not have met yet. And Bethany's also going to share in our discussion today, a presentation, because she was the one who created the model that we're going to talk about. And I really thank Simeon for giving us that great intro, and we're going to hope to help Warren answer his question this morning. Because we have some perspectives on what it costs to implement a Moduloop implementation. So Cici, we've created this tool, and we call it the Inclusive and Instant Payment System Estimator, but it actually estimates across different types of payment systems. So why don't I just turn it over to you, Cici, and tell us what this tool does.
Sure, if we could go to the next slide. This is our sort of showcase slide, if you will. We understand this community gets asked and asks the following three questions pretty regularly. Which approach is the most cost-effective to go live, or excuse me, most cost-effective? Which approach is the fastest to go live? And can the platform support a cost recovery plus investment model? The estimator helps decision makers compare platform approaches and explore the projected impact of various platform choices on overall earnings and expenses. It leverages informed assumptions from experts. We spent, Bethany, 3 or 4 months speaking with different people on the phone to try and get robust information behind the model to drive it. And that's what we use to help forecast various earning and loss statements for each type of platform approach.
Yeah, so Cici, you mentioned platform approaches, plural. So what are those?
That's great. Next slide, please. So, and a team putting together an inclusive instant payment system often asks, what are my options even for establishing a platform? And in reality, there's no single answer to this question. There are a variety of choices and a number of requirements to consider. For the model, we've identified 4 platform approaches. And before I dive into the 4, I want to acknowledge that we distinguish between a scheme and a platform here. Both are critically important to the success of an instant inclusive payment system. This estimator hyper focuses on the platform, the earnings and costs that come with implementing, developing, and maintaining a platform. So the 4 types are the following: a vendor licensed solution, a proprietary build solution, and 2 flavors of Moduloop, where OSS components are leveraged when available, and when they're still under development, they're either purchased from a vendor, or they are built in-house. Elizabeth, any do
you want to share some perspective on, and I know you talked about how we consulted various experts. Of course, we leveraged internal experience, and but tell us more about the data, right? So to the extent you can, without giving away confidential sources. I mean, why should folks have confidence in this type of perspective? Why do they, why should they think this is something that is helpful?
Yeah, this was a challenging exercise. I think we tackled it through 3 or 4 different approaches when we finally landed on sort of what is available today. And the estimator is, as we mentioned, we spoke to a number of experts who have been involved in the implementations of inclusive instant payment systems in a number of different markets. So we use their knowledge in coordination with our own to put in assumptions where necessary. Those assumptions are combined with the user of the estimators, their own market information and context information. So there are probably, I would say, 30 inputs that are required from the user that we just couldn't estimate, right? They reflect certain attributes of unique attributes of your market that you need to include. And together those create sort of the robust outputs that we have in place. And, we call it the estimator for that very purpose. This model reflects a moment in time. The market and Mojo Loop are constantly evolving. And we captured a moment in time, which was sort of December 2021, if you had to put a stamp on it. And meanwhile, the markets are evolving. So we also want to acknowledge that when using the estimator, I would suggest sort of running your own scenario analysis, right? Put in an estimate that is your best guess, and then put in an estimate that's maybe 20% higher or 20% lower. We do allow for modifiers, is what we call them in the estimator, where you can scale up or scale down your own choices for different platforms when you think that one may be higher or lower in some instances. I know that's a little confusing if you haven't seen the estimator, but we do allow for some sort of scenario-based exploration within the model, but it's really a tool to explore. The last thing your question prompted me that I wanted to mention is that the model, the platform approaches that this caters for is a thin model that really supports, of course, clearing and settlement and some ancillary supportive services. We do allow placeholders for implementers or decision makers that also want to acknowledge additional shared services that they may offer within the platform, though we don't make estimates ourselves in those instances.
That's an excellent point. So this is a scenario-based analysis. It is, it's not static, however, right? There's assumptions in there that can be modified, right, depending on the actual situation. And you also point out that, these are, the best estimates that we could provide in December of 2020, or actually 2021. And, I want to just put a call out for any Mojo Loop enabled implementations to help us improve this data, right? That, this is a rapidly evolving market on all levels, all the platform approaches. But Bethany, as we go to the next slide, I'm just going to ask Cici to tell us what things looked like at the end of last year among these approaches.
Yeah, so we had to use our own tool, and so we put it to the test and we ran a scenario. And what you see here is an illustrative output from the scenario that we ran, and it reflects true market data that we thought could be a realistic set of information to explore. How do these platform approaches compare to one another in our scenario? And of course, one of the outputs of the model is total annual expenses. And in our illustrative example, we showcase that the Mojo Loop plus proprietary build, so where you build components that aren't available via OSS. This is the yellow line, if you can see from a distance. It requires the lowest initial investment expense, as you can see on the far left, compared to all three, where the highest is the vendor procured. And similarly, the two Mojo Loop platforms, both the vendor procured and the Mojo Loop plus proprietary build, require the lowest annual ongoing expenses.
And we see the sort of startup initial investment. That's the mountain on the left. What about the blips on the right? We're static or constant for a while, and then we have these additional expenses, but at a very, they're not all at the same point. How should we understand that?
Yeah, great question. So this is a reflection that each of these systems goes live at a different point in time, which the next slide shows, but let's stay here for just a moment. These recognize new expenses that take place to make sure the platform stays operational. And one of the important attributes in my mind that this model does is it keeps things on a 10-year time horizon. We often see people put models on a 5-year time horizon. Of course, you can sort of cap the outputs of this model at the 5 years, but as you can see, you lose valuable information if you don't let it run for the 10, because these additional expenses surface, year 5, year 6, year 7, later on. We also are advocates, you and I have discussed this many times for the 10-year time horizon for big implementation projects like this. It's important to recognize the many years that it may take to get to cost recovery. I always go back to the old adage: don't judge a CEO until 3 years after they come into the company.
So you're referencing these ongoing costs, and certainly we have opted for the 10-year horizon. This is an infrastructure investment, right? It is new. It'll take some time to go through the system. And also we're sort of supported in that 10-year horizon because, I used to work at the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve uses a 10-year horizon for these investments. Of course, they also compare it on a 5-year return on investment, but they understand that more than likely it's not going to be fully recouped in a 5-year, and that 10 years historically has proven to be more accurate. So let's go into the next one about, everyone wants to know how quickly we can go live and start that return.
Yeah, so in our illustrative scenario, the vendor procured was the most rapid to go live, as you can see here, followed by the 2 Mojo Loop platform approaches, and the longest to go live was the proprietary build. The vendor procured solution benefits in some ways where the Mojo Loop platform doesn't require the development of new code relative to a proprietary build. So some of the sort of innate assumptions that you may have about different approaches could be reflected in this timeline. But what I want to say here, and this is not reflected on the page, is that although the 2 Mojo Loop solutions are slightly slower to go live relative to the vendor procured, the Mojo Loop platform supports a cost recovery more quickly than any of the other 2 platform approaches. So the Mojo Loop plus vendor procured solution was the least costly to get to a IRR of 0, an internal rate of return of 0, at which point you can operate as a cost recovery, followed by the Mojo Loop plus proprietary build. So though we see a year, or in the Mojo Loop plus proprietary build approach, a 3-year delay to getting to go live, the overall costs and earning structures are such that the total investment in this scenario was actually lower for those 2 approaches relative to the 2 at the top of the screen.
So trade-offs, I think we can't escape them in one way or the other. And I know we have some more data that's in the model. I know we can't show it all here, but can you give us a preview of what's there, Cici?
Sure. Next slide. And this should say dummy data, not dummy date. These images are not representative from our illustrative scenario, but we did want to showcase that the outputs from the model are 5-fold. you get a scenario analysis where you see graphs that place each platform approach against one another, so you can compare ongoing expenses, earnings, volumes against one another. Then you have 4 tabs that are a deep dive into each platform approach. And that allows you to look really deeply under the hood of each of these platform approaches. And you can look to see sort of what numbers are resulting from those and choose to either go back and change certain inputs if you think it's not representative of your reality, or you can use that information to help drive your decisions. So the outputs are pretty robust. Anyone tackling this, I would suggest take a few hours to sort of roll up their sleeves and dive into it, because it's pretty robust. That being said, we did do our best to make it as usable as possible, decreasing the number of inputs originally from somewhere above 100 to, I think it's closer to 30 to 50 at this point in time.
Thank you, Cici. I just want to close out before we hopefully have some questions and discussion that, this tool was commissioned for those of you in this room who would be initial users to provide hopefully some comments and feedback on how it works. It was commissioned as another tool in the Mojaloop Foundation toolkit, right? That this is something that people are asking this question: how do we compare? How do we know that this is the right approach for our particular implementation? We believe that this is the basis to give you the answer to this question. It strikes a nice balance, we believe, between usability as well as, shall I say, extensibility, that, it's not fully static. It doesn't make all the choices for you. It gives you some flexibility there. And we're really hoping that you'll provide input to this, right? So that it can continue to be an organic resource. So with that, I think, Simeon, back to you guys in Arusha.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Cici and Bethany. I will just span around the room. I see 3 hands. We'll go with Steve, John Mark, there was one at the back, Azim. So we'll take those 3 and then see if there are any more questions after that. Steve? I'll grab the microphone for you.
This is awesome. You guys can hear me? Yeah. So this is amazing. And definitely, I don't know if you saw the 2 presentations ago, we were talking about Myanmar, and this tool would be really interesting to apply to WinePay. And so I hope that we get to do that. The question, though, is a little more long-term. One of the goals we have with Mojaloop is that theoretically, there's 2 long-term goals we would like to be thinking about. One is, as the platform, as Mojaloop becomes more robust, as we get more and more implementations, theoretically, the cost of each new implementation is actually going to go down compared to a vendor that might keep their pricing constant. And so like you said, you mentioned that this is a snapshot in time. The other one is, as more Mojaloops get deployed and we start being able to come up with numbers of seeing what are the ongoing operational costs. I'm wondering, considering those are things that are our goals, is we want to eventually decrease both of those costs, the deployment cost and the per transaction cost for operations. Can this tool be used for us to measure ourselves as a community and be constantly looking at our progress towards those goals?
I'm going to chime in on Steve's question, because I think it's just, a critical overarching question. Obviously Glenbrook, excuse me, Glenbrook is a friend of the Mojaloop community, very supportive of these goals. I think the Mojaloop community really wants also an objective interpretation of these data, right? So we need to strike that balance and ensure that this tool is updated from a an outside perspective, right? That doesn't favor any direction or the other. We have really tried to include that here. We know that it needs to be updated over time, and we'll need to find a way to do that, right? Right now it's in an Excel spreadsheet that will be difficult to maintain in its current format, right? Because who knows what version, who's applying here. So we'll need to find a way to do that. And I think the answer will lie in part in how useful this tool is for the community, right? The more utility, the more we can think about how to better deploy it. I think that we do need to maybe capture some of these assumptions at these points in time and measure our success by, what this looks like at another, future static point. And we can't do that in a realistic fashion without further inputs from the community, right? So we need to know what your experiences are. And I think at some point in time, this would need to be, again, benchmarked by what's happening in the vendor procured environment. And, these two are going to react to each other. The more success you have, possibly other prices will go down, right? It'll be a trend in the same direction. So, let's get a good start and then see where this needs to go is my response back. Hope that's helpful, Steve.
So related question was, I was curious, another assumption that we often make is that we're saving costs on change requests, a vendor procured solution over a 10-year horizon. As the payments demands change from a country, are going to be able to charge significant change requests. In addition, the cost of onboarding and purchasing vendor procured software to do the onboarding for all of the financial institutions. So my question is, again, we have a lot of assumptions about that and that we're better because of that. Were those incorporated into this model so that we can, again, measure whether we're succeeding against our assumptions?
Steve, we added, I think this gets to your question. There is, in the vendor procured solution, there's an acknowledgement of annual software costs that result from just whatever contractual relationship someone may have with the vendor. It doesn't necessarily acknowledge change requests specifically. It's more to sort of continue licensing the software that you asked to license originally. There are places where you can modify that up or down to reflect, let's say you want to predict that you're going to have a change request in 5 years. You can modify your annual licensing cost to reflect that increase and keep it static on the Mojo Loop the two Mojo Loop platform approaches to sort of acknowledge that change. We didn't build that into the model.
And Steve, I think the answer to that is going to be very dependent, right, on what the question or the change request is, because is that functionality available in the OSS, right? And I know that that's also becoming richer as we move forward.
So thank you.
Jamar?
Thank you very much. A very important tool for the community. 2 or 3 questions. One, the vendor solution, the estimate cost there, is it based on some known vendors and their costing for their products? That's question 1. Then the second question, the estimate on proprietary, maybe software or other tools. I think you have Mojo Loop plus proprietary tools. Do we know which ones exactly used for that estimation for that cost? And then my third question, maybe what assumption can be taken, for instance, with this estimate, if you are deploying in Peru versus deploying in Tanzania? I would expect the cost to be different, but what assumption can be made around there? Thank you.
So why don't I take the first one about, where did we, what did we benchmark these numbers on? And I think that maybe Cici and or Bethany to the second questions. So Jean-Marc, these are other vendors in the space. They are leading real-time payment platform providers. You would think the names would come very quickly to you if you looked it up. But we are not in a position to share who they were, right? Because we largely got the data through a sort of intersection of folks who used to work for the platform very recently, right? And those who had been involved in different implementations globally. That's I think is as strong as we can get. I will say that they are leading vendors, so you're comparing the best here. And over to Cici, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I totally captured the second question, so I'll ask that you repeat it. But while before then, let me tackle the third, and hopefully the community is still online. So the third question, you were sort of asking about market context, was my interpretation. Great question. A really important driver of volume, which also hugely impacts earnings, downstream earnings of the platform, is the number of transactions that we expect to flow through the system. We allow for market volume estimates in aggregate, and you choose amongst 5 personas that you think best represent your market based on level of digitization, population size, and one other attribute that's lost on me right now. So you select which of the 5 personas is best representative of your market. In addition to that, you input certain characteristics of your market yourself, like population size, growth, and mobile penetration. Collectively, those create sort of what we think is the total digital transaction volume by use case, and actually by sub use case. That's the total addressable market. From there, you as the user make estimates for what amount of that market you think the platform will capture over what year and by use case. So again, there's sort of 2 ways in which you can adjust the tool to recognize your market, if that makes sense. Bethany, anything to add there?
Yeah, thank you, Cici. And also go ahead.
Number of financial institutions too.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, so there's the market transactions, a number of financial institutions in your specific market that you expect to be onboarded to the switch. And finally, we also, from an expense standpoint, look at the local market context. So the user is able to input the expected wages in their market and different localization or customization expenses that could be applicable in their market. So we really allow the user of this model to address the local market from both the demand perspective or the revenue side, and also the expense side of the switch. And
thank you.
Could you repeat your second question?
Yeah, the second question was just about when you have Moja Loop plus some other proprietary software or tools, you had an estimate for that proprietary software. So the question was, what is this software? Is it something standard that you've listed out to say you need 1, 2, 3, 4 tools on top of Moja Loop that you've put out and estimated the cost?
So I think if I understand your question, so we spoke to folks in the Moja Loop community to understand sort of where the development process was for different components of Moja Loop. And we tried to acknowledge that and then estimate the plus proprietary build attempts to acknowledge the additions that are required from those OSS components that are in place to get to a fully functional and operational platform. So that's sort of the plus in the plus vendor procured or plus proprietary build, is to recognize the additions that would need to be developed or purchased from what's available from Moja Loop as of December 2021. So there is.
Thank you.
There is sort of like a very long list that acknowledges the different components and sort of the status of those that is available.
Thank you very much. The tool will be very useful. Thank you.
I think we'll take the final question right at the back. Azim, get your mic.
Sure.
Hello. So the data that like this tool that you guys have created, I'm assuming that this has been created with the historical data from the current Moja Loop deployments, right? So there had been a curve in the development of open source version of Moja Loop, as in, I guess, back in like 2-3 years ago, there were no SDK component that actually came pretty recently. So the integration earlier was quite complex, but this was realized during convenings and during the deployments of Moja Loop that there has to be a component to integrate with Moja Loop, right? So the SDK component came in right after 1 or 2 years. Post that, that SDK component can be used by FSPs to actually integrate into their own system. And there are a lot of other components that are part of OSS, but are not pretty much, you can say, well known to the entire community. Like there's a payment hub that these Finerect Foundation and the Ed team is doing. So my question was around this thing that this model incorporates that element that the cost of actually integrating with FSPs, or the cost of actually implementing certain build that came after some time will be definitely much lesser. Say in 2023, it would be much it would be very easy for an FSP to actually connect to Moja Loop, provided they use the SDK component. But it was very difficult earlier. Then there was Payment Hub actually, Payment Manager. It came like down the road as well. Also, your tool has this vendor component. It has details around some pretty well-established vendors doing instant payment system. All the deployments that I have seen across multiple countries, they have a turnkey solution, right? So when a vendor comes in, vendor provides a price for license and deployment. This price in itself includes maintenance till 5 years, and it has different components to it, like they'll buy Oracle, they'll buy services from certain other third parties, which would be 24/7 support and all these things. But with the OSS version, these things are something that don't come along. Right now as well, MySQL have actually published a support services. I'm not sure how many people are using it, but that is something that also has to go into this tool, provided the instant payment system country actually take those services or not. That is something optional, but these elements should also go into this tool.
Let me try and take those two, and my colleagues can fill in what I miss. So your first one, well taken. You know, I think there is efficiencies that are gained as institutions are onboarded onto any platform. And certainly that's true for Moja Loop implementation. We allow for the user to estimate the number of implementation days it will take for different types of entities to onboard to the platform. And then you can modify that by platform approach. So you can modify that to recognize that on average, you think over the course of an implementation, it will take fewer total days for a non-bank to onboard to a Moja Loop platform. I say on average very intentionally, because we don't sort of acknowledge the year by year or institution by institution efficiency. You as a user are sort of going to have to average that out and input that estimate into the tool. But it does allow for that modification. And again, I think you sort of recognize and are grappling with the recognition that, Mojo Loop is evolving. How do we acknowledge that in a tool? That's something we were really struggling with as well. For your second question, and I have since lost it, so I'll ask my colleagues to chime in here. Oh, it was around servicing. So again, we have a placeholder for the user to input their estimates for what they think an annual service fee could be that they want to include in their estimate by platform approach. So again, this is an instance where we didn't feel comfortable making an assumption on a user's behalf. It requires a user's input to acknowledge whether they're choosing to use services like that, and if they want to include that across all platform approaches, and if so, to what degree, and that degree may vary. So it is a place for input from the user.
There is one question that is up on the Q&A panel. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I know that question came from Sam. Sam, we'll get your response on Slack. Those of you guys who haven't joined us, please go to mojoloop.io/Slack. I think we will end it there. Thank you, Cici, Elizabeth, and Bethany. A round of applause for them as we close. Thanks again for joining us. This roundly brings us to the end of day one. Lots of business sessions. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will not keep you any longer, just a couple of quick announcements. Once more, those of you who need PCR tests for your return back home, please see me today so that we can get that sorted and out of the way. We start again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Teas and coffees will be out by probably 9:30 in the morning. All the slide decks, the presentations are up on GitHub. You can access them at mojoloop.io/decks. Decks is DECKS. We will see you all bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a good rest of your evening.